"Mom, I'm sorry, but you shouldn't come to the wedding." That sentence has haunted me for weeks, like a cut that refuses to heal. I was peeling potatoes in my small kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, when my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. It was from my old neighbor, Patty. She'd posted a photo of a wedding invitation. "Can't believe Jason and Emily are getting married this weekend." The knife froze midair. Jason, my only son, hadn't called. No message. Nothing. I scrolled down, hoping it was some mistake. Then I saw the comment that ripped me apart. "So sad, Diane can't be there. But it's for the best. For the best. For who?" That evening, the mail arrived, a thick ivory envelope with gold edges. My heart jumped. Maybe it's just late, I thought. But when I opened it, a smaller note slipped out. "Please understand, Diane. This day is for family only." It was signed by Emily, my future daughter-in-law. I read it 3 times, hoping the words would change. But they didn't. For family only. I raised that boy alone after his father died of lung cancer. I worked double shifts at St. Mary's Hospital, walked home through snow just to save for his college. And now, I wasn't family. The next morning, I drove to the bridal shop where Emily worked. She looked up, startled. "Emily," I said, forcing a calm voice, "is there a reason I wasn't invited to my own son's wedding?" She gave a polite little smile. "Jason thought it would be less stressful." "You two have very different energies." "Different energies," I repeated, my voice trembling. "You'll understand someday," she said, as if dismissing a stranger. I turned away before I said something I'd regret, but inside something cracked, something called trust. 3 days later, the church bells rang. I sat in my old 2006 Ford Taurus, parked across from St. Andrew's Church. Through the window, I saw the guests arriving, suits, pastel dresses, laughter floating in the air. I saw Emily's parents hugging Jason, posing for photos. I saw my son's bright smile, the same one that used to make every sacrifice worth it. Then I saw my reflection in the rearview mirror, gray hair pinned back, trembling hands, a cheap bouquet wilting beside me. I wanted to open the door to run in and shout, "That's my son!" But a guard stood by the gate with a guest list. My name wasn't there. I wasn't on any list. When the music started, Canon in D, tears blurred my vision. I used to hum that very tune in the hospital the day he was born. I'd promised I'd always be by his side. Now I sat outside those doors, listening to applause I wasn't part of. And just as the bells rang again, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number: "Don't leave town. You need to know what really happened." I stared at the screen, heart pounding so loud I could barely breathe. Who sent it? Emily, Jason, or someone who knew the real reason I'd been banned from my own son's wedding? People think heartbreak happens in one moment, a single betrayal, a single cruel sentence. But that's not true. It's the slow years that break you, the years when you give everything and expect nothing back. Jason was my entire world. After his father, Mark, died of lung cancer, it was just the two of us against everything. He was 8. I still remember the smell of the hospital room, the way Jason clung to my sleeve while I signed the death papers. I promised him then, "It's okay, sweetheart. Mom's not going anywhere." We lived in a small house on East Broad Street next to the train tracks. The nights were loud with the sound of passing engines, but Jason loved it. He'd press his face to the window and whisper, "That one's heading to Chicago. I'll go there someday, Mom." I worked double shifts at St. Mary's Hospital, mostly in the geriatric ward. My days started at 5 a.m. and ended close to midnight. Sometimes I'd come home to find him asleep at the kitchen table, books, spread everywhere, a half-eaten grilled cheese still on the plate. I'd cover him with my old cardigan and think, this is worth it. One day he'll have everything I didn't. When he got accepted to Ohio State University, I cried so hard the acceptance letter nearly tore in my hands. Tuition was impossible on my salary, so I picked up extra shifts, weekends, holidays, whatever they offered. I missed Christmas 2 years in a row. My hands cracked from washing too many surgical trays. My back ached from lifting patients twice my size. But when Jason graduated, standing there in his cap and gown, he hugged me and said, "You did it, Mom. I couldn't have made it without you." And in that moment, every blister, every sleepless night, it all felt like it had meaning. Then, Emily came along. She was pretty confident, the kind of girl who looked like she'd never waited for a bus in the rain. Jason met her at the hospital fundraiser where I worked the night shift. She came with her parents, the Donovans, owners of a real estate company. I remember seeing Jason's eyes light up when she spoke. He was smitten before dessert. At first I was happy for him. God knows he deserved love. But things changed faster than I expected. Suddenly, Jason was too busy to come by on weekends. When he did, Emily tagged along, always looking around my modest home like she was inspecting something for sale. One evening, I served her a casserole, my late husband's favorite, and she poked at it with a fork. "Oh," she said, smiling tightly, "you made this with canned soup, didn't you?" I laughed it off, but Jason's eyes flicked to mine, the first flicker of embarrassment I'd ever seen from him toward me. After that, the distance grew. He stopped asking about my health, my job, my life. Every visit became shorter, more polite, more uncomfortable. When I tried to give him a check, a small one from my savings to help with their new apartment, Emily refused to take it. "We don't need that, Diane," she said, voice sweet but sharp. "Jason's salary is enough now." I told myself it was just pride, but deep down, I knew she didn't want my help or my presence. She wanted me gone. A year later, Jason called to tell me he'd proposed. I waited for him to ask me to help plan to share his excitement. Instead, his tone was clipped distant. "Emily's family is handling most of it, Mom. You don't have to worry." That sentence, "you don't have to worry," hit me harder than I expected, because worry was all I'd ever done for him. When I hung up, the house felt too quiet. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the wind outside sounded like a farewell. The next time I saw Jason was at a diner downtown 2 months before the wedding. I remember the smell of burnt coffee, the hum of the neon sign flickering above us. He looked tired, distracted, checking his phone between sentences. I finally asked Jason, "Is everything okay between us?" He hesitated, then said, "Mom, Emily she wants things to be simple. No drama. You know how people talk." I stared at him, not recognizing the man in front of me. Since when did I become the drama? He didn't answer. Just stared at the salt shaker and said quietly, "Please, Mom, don't make things harder." That was the moment I realized my son wasn't being taken from me in one blow. He'd been drifting away for years, and I'd been too busy loving him to notice. The night it all began to fall apart was the engagement dinner. Emily's parents had rented the private room at the Willow House, a fancy restaurant on the edge of town. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, candles that probably cost more than my weekly paycheck at the hospital. When I arrived, Emily's mother, Linda Donovan, greeted me with that tight, polite smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Diane, how wonderful you could make it," she said, as if I'd crashed the event rather than being invited. I handed her a box. Inside was a hand-stitched table runner I'd made embroidered with Jason and Emily's initials. I'd stayed up till 2 a.m. finishing it. "Oh," Linda said, holding it like it might stain her manicure. "How quaint." Jason stood up when he saw me, kissed my cheek quickly, but there was tension in his shoulders. "Mom, you made it." "Great," he said, glancing nervously toward Emily. She was wearing a white silk dress, every inch of her perfect. She gave me a smile so bright and cold it could freeze glass. "We weren't sure you'd come," she said lightly. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, forcing warmth into my voice. The dinner started with champagne toasts. Emily's father, Robert, raised his glass and spoke about merging 2 families and 2 legacies. I noticed he never once looked at me. When the waiter poured my drink, Linda whispered something to him, and my glass stayed empty. They served roasted duck and asparagus. I'd never eaten duck before. It tasted oily and foreign. As the others laughed about ski trips and investment portfolios, I picked up my plate, feeling smaller with each passing minute. When the desserts came miniature lemon tarts, I stood up, holding my small gift bag. "Before everyone leaves," I said, smiling, "I just wanted to give something to the happy couple." Emily's eyes flickered. I pulled out a small box wrapped in blue paper. Inside was Mark's pocket watch, the one he'd received when he retired from the Air Force. I'd kept it locked away since he died. "Jason, Your father wanted you to have this when you got married? I said softly. The table fell silent. Jason's eyes widened. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be the one who cried at his dad's funeral. But before he could speak, Emily reached out and shut the box. That's lovely, she said, forcing a smile. But we don't really do heirlooms, do we, babe? Everyone laughed awkwardly. Jason said nothing. His hand stayed on the table, frozen between reaching for me and holding hers. Linda leaned in and said, "Oh, Diane, you're so sentimental." "That's sweet. Sweet. Like a child's drawing stuck on a fridge before it's thrown away. I wanted to disappear." I excused myself to the restroom, stood in the mirror under harsh white lights, and whispered, "Don't cry. Don't give them that." But my reflection looked like a stranger, tired eyes lipstick, slightly smudged, a woman out of place in her own family. When I came back, the table was louder, champagne glasses clinking. Emily was showing off her engagement ring, a flawless diamond that could have paid off my mortgage. Jason looked proud, glowing, and for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't part of his joy anymore. At the end of the night, as guests were leaving, Emily walked up to me. "Diane," she said, voice low, "thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy for you." I smiled thinly. "Easy." She stepped closer, her perfume too strong. "You've done a lot for Jason, and we're grateful. But this is a new chapter for him. He needs space to grow." "Space," I repeated, barely keeping my voice steady. "Yes," she said softly. "Sometimes love means letting go." Her words felt rehearsed, like something she'd practiced in front of a mirror. I wanted to scream, "He's my son, not your project," but instead I just nodded and left. The night air outside was cold, sharp against my face. I walked to my old Taurus and sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering wheel, until my knuckles turned white. Through the restaurant window, I could see Jason laughing, arm around Emily. He didn't look back once. When I got home, I placed Mark's pocket watch on the kitchen counter. It ticked faintly, the only sound in the house. Then it stopped. Just like that, dead silent. And I don't know why, but in that moment, I whispered to the empty room, "If you can hear me, Mark, please don't let her take him away from me." 3 days before the wedding, I still hadn't received an invitation. I told myself it must have been lost in the mail, that maybe Emily's family had sent it late. But deep down, I knew. I could feel it every time I saw their smiling posts on Facebook, the bridal brunch, the rehearsal dinner, the caption that read, "So excited for our big day, surrounded by everyone we love." Everyone. Except me. That Friday morning, I finally called Jason. My hands shook as the phone rang. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice rushed, distracted. "Hey, Mom, I was going to call you." "You were," I said, forcing a small laugh. "That's funny. The wedding's tomorrow." Silence. Then he sighed. "Mom, look, things got complicated. Emily thought it'd be best to keep things small." "Small," I said. "There are 200 people on the guest list. I saw the photos, Jason." He hesitated, voice low. "It's just, you and Emily don't really get along. She doesn't want any tension." "Tension," I repeated. "I raised you alone. I worked myself half to death so you could stand there in that tuxedo, and now you're embarrassed of me." He didn't answer. I heard a woman's voice in the background. Emily. "Jason, we're late," she called. He mumbled something, then said quickly, "Mom, please don't come tomorrow. It'll just make things harder." The line went dead. I sat there in my kitchen, the cheap clock ticking louder than usual, and realized my son had just uninvited me from his wedding. That night, I didn't sleep. I pulled out an old photo album, Jason's first day of school, his graduation, the fishing trip we took when he was 12. His smile in those photos used to light up my world. Now it hurt to look at. Saturday morning came gray and cold. I dressed in a simple navy dress and pinned on my small silver brooch, the one Mark gave me on our 10th anniversary. I told myself I'd just drive by the church, nothing more. Just to see him. The parking lot of St. Andrew's Church was already packed. I parked across the street in my old Ford Taurus. Through the window, I could see it all white roses draped over the gates, a red carpet leading up the steps, photographers snapping pictures as the guests laughed and posed. Emily arrived first, stepping out of a white limousine. Her dress shimmered like frost in the sunlight. She looked radiant and cruelly untouchable. The crowd gasped, phones lifted. Then Jason appeared beside her, smiling nervously, his arm around her waist. My breath caught in my throat. That was my little boy, the same one who used to sit on my lap and ask if angels could see us from the sky. I pressed my hand against the car window as if that could close the distance. A security guard walked by, checking the guest list. I rolled down the window a little and asked softly, "Excuse me, could you check for a Diane Whitfield?" He looked at the clipboard, then shook his head. "Sorry, ma'am. Only family and approved guests. Family." I nodded, forcing a smile, and rolled the window back up. My hands were trembling, but I couldn't move. I just sat there as the music started. Canon in D, floating faintly through the open doors. That song. The same one that played when Jason was born. I'd hummed it in the hospital room, whispering, "You're safe now, baby." I closed my eyes, but the tears came anyway. When the ceremony ended, the guests poured out cheering. Jason and Emily kissed under a shower of rose petals. A photographer shouted, "Hold her close." "That's it," Jason laughed, and for a split second our eyes met across the street. He froze. His smile faltered. I thought he'll come over. But Emily touched his arm, whispered something in his ear, and he turned away. That was the moment I knew my son wasn't just gone. He'd chosen to forget me. As I started the car, something white fluttered onto my windshield, a stray wedding program carried by the wind. I picked it up. My name wasn't printed anywhere inside, but near the bottom, I noticed something strange. A small handwritten note beside Jason's name. In tiny letters it said, "For Dad, wish you were here." My throat tightened. Mark. Even in that room full of people, Jason had remembered his father, but not me. I drove home through the drizzle, every raindrop echoing against the windshield like a heartbeat. I told myself I'd let it go, that this was just how life worked. But that night when I was about to sleep, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from an unknown number, "Don't leave town. You need to hear what really happened." And for the first time in years, I felt something other than sadness, fear. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the kitchen window. The house felt heavier than usual, quiet in a way that pressed against your chest. On the table sat the wedding program I'd found on my windshield, still damp from last night's drizzle. Jason's handwriting stared back at me. "For Dad? Wish you were here." I ran my fingers over the words until the ink smudged. He remembered his father, but not his mother. That thought sat like a stone in my stomach. I tried to distract myself with small things, making coffee, folding laundry, pretending the ache in my chest was just another part of the morning routine. But then the doorbell rang. No one ever visits me on Sundays. I opened the door to find a man in a gray suit holding a large envelope. He was older, with white hair and kind eyes that didn't quite meet mine. "Mrs. Whitfield." "Yes, I'm Alan Price from Price & Rowe Attorneys. I worked with your late husband, Mark. May I come in?" The name rang a faint bell. Mark had mentioned a lawyer years ago, back when he handled some military paperwork before his diagnosis. I gestured toward the table. "Of course, please sit." He placed the envelope down carefully as if it contained something fragile. "I'm sorry to intrude. Mark asked me to deliver this letter to you, under specific circumstances." I frowned. "What circumstances?" He hesitated. "He asked that it be given to you after Jason's wedding day." The words hit me like a gust of wind. I sat down, feeling my pulse quicken. "He passed 15 years ago," I said quietly. "Why wait until now?" "He was very clear," Alan replied. "Said you'd understand when the time came." He slid the envelope toward me. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a folded letter written in Mark's neat handwriting. The paper had yellowed slightly, but his scent, faint cologne and cedar, still lingered. "My dearest Diane, if you're reading this, it means our boy is getting married. I wish I could see him, but if I can't, I need you to remember this. Protect Jason from himself." I paused, heart pounding. What did that mean? "There are things I never told you. decisions I made after the diagnosis. I didn't want to burden you while you were fighting to keep us afloat, but now you'll need what I left behind. Go to the old storage unit on Fairview Road. The key is in the envelope taped under the kitchen drawer. I looked up sharply. Under the kitchen drawer, Alan nodded. He mentioned that specifically. There's more if you wish to read. I continued, voice barely a whisper. I opened an account in your name before I died. Not for me, but for you and Jason. Only you have access. If anything ever threatens him, or you use it, don't tell anyone, especially not the Donovans. They'll come for it if they know. My breath caught. And Diane, if Jason ever forgets who you are, don't hate him. Love has a strange way of coming back around. When I finished, I could barely see through my tears. Alan sat quietly for a moment, then spoke gently. Your husband wanted you to have a safety net. He said you might need it one day. There's a note here with the bank information, a private account untouched. He slid another paper across the table. My name was on it, dated 2008. The balance made my head spin, $482,000. I blinked, thinking it must be a mistake. I'd been scraping by for years, living paycheck to paycheck, while this account had existed all along. Is this real? Completely, Alan said. He wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of and that Jason would never fall into the wrong hands. The wrong hands, I repeated softly, staring out the window, where rain streamed down the glass like tears. Emily's family, the Donovans, had money power reputation. They didn't need mine. But something about Mark's warning, don't tell the Donovans, made the hair on the back of my neck rise. Mr. Price. I asked, did Mark ever say why he didn't want them involved? He hesitated again. He didn't name them directly, but he mentioned that someone from Emily's family had approached him years ago, before his diagnosis, about an investment. Something he turned down. I frowned. What kind of investment? He never said, only that he didn't trust them. Alan left soon after, promising to send the official documents by mail. When the door closed behind him, I sat there for a long time staring at Mark's handwriting. Protect Jason from himself. The words looped in my mind like a riddle. What could Mark have known back then, 15 years ago, about our son's future? I pulled open the bottom kitchen drawer, feeling along the underside, until my fingers brushed against a small envelope taped to the wood. Inside was an old brass key. On it, a faded tag read, Fairview Storage number 109. Rain was still falling when I drove out of town. The wipers squeaked against the glass, my heartbeat matching their rhythm. Fairview Road was almost empty, just a row of aging warehouses and flickering streetlights. The storage facility sat at the end, its metal gate rusted and half open. Unit 109 was near the back. My fingers shook as I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a tired click. Inside, the smell of dust and engine oil hit me. There was an old wooden trunk, a stack of boxes, and a folded tarp covering something bulky. I reached for the trunk first, brushing away cobwebs. It wasn't locked. Inside were photos, folders, and a small black notebook labeled For Diane. I flipped it open and froze. Inside were names, dates, bank transfers, handwritten notes in Mark's tight script. One name appeared over and over again, circled in red ink, Robert Donovan, Emily's father. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the rain outside. Mark hadn't just left money. He'd left a warning one I was 15 years too late to understand. That night, I couldn't sleep. The notebook sat open on the table beside me, its pages filled with Mark's handwriting, steady, deliberate, like a man who knew every word mattered. The rain had stopped, but the air in my house felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. Robert Donovan's name appeared again and again, dates that went back 20 years, references to fund transfers, property shares, and something labeled Weston Holdings Proposal, declined. I didn't understand most of it, but one note near the bottom made my stomach turn. Robert approached me again, wants access to medical tech funding, promised security for Jason's future if I cooperate, refused again. He won't forget this. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. Robert Donovan, Emily's father, the man who toasted family legacy at that dinner, had once tried to corner my husband into a business deal, and Mark had turned him down. Now, years later, our son had married into that same family. It felt like fate was laughing in my face. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery. Mark's grave sat beneath a sycamore tree, the headstone clean, but the flowers wilted from the storm. I replaced them with fresh lilies, the kind he loved, and whispered I found it, Mark. Whatever you were hiding, I found it. But what am I supposed to do now? The wind rustled the leaves overhead, but no answer came. Only the faint echo of birds and the hum of passing cars. I went home and sat by the kitchen window, watching the morning sunlight spill across the table where the notebook lay open. That's when I noticed a folded piece of paper I hadn't seen before tucked inside the back cover. It wasn't in Mark's handwriting. It was typed dated 2009 with the letterhead of Donovan Real Estate Group. Mr. Whitfield, we appreciate your interest in the partnership, but as you've declined to move forward, we will consider the matter closed. However, should your family ever need assistance in the future, our door remains open, RD. My heart sank. He wasn't threatening Mark directly. He was playing polite the way rich men do when they're planning something cruel, but calling it business. And suddenly, Emily's polite smiles, her mother's subtle insults, her words about space, they all made sense. It wasn't just pride or class. It was power, control. The Donovans didn't want me near Jason, not because I was embarrassing, but because I didn't belong in their version of his life. That realization broke something open inside me. I'd spent years keeping quiet, trying to be small, trying not to cause trouble. I'd accepted the humiliation at the dinner, the wedding, the whispers, all because I thought staying quiet was dignified. But sitting there staring at Mark's warning, I felt something shift. I wasn't just going to sit in silence anymore. That evening, I dug out my old laptop. The screen flickered to life after 3 tries, dusty, outdated, but still working. I opened a blank page and typed the title, The Mother They Left Behind. At first, I just wrote for myself about the nights I'd worked at the hospital, the smell of antiseptic on my hands, the way Jason used to hug me when I came home, about the moment he drifted away, about the wedding that shut me out. The words came fast, angry, raw. I wrote until my fingers cramped and tears blurred the screen. Then I hit publish. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized what I'd done. I'd posted it publicly on a small online community for widows. I expected maybe 1 or 2 polite comments. Instead, by noon, there were dozens. I went through the same thing. My son's wife doesn't let me see my grandkids. Thank you for saying what I never could. By the end of the week, there were hundreds of comments. Someone suggested I turn it into a blog, so I did. I called it Second Chances. I wrote about grief, loneliness, aging forgiveness, but mostly about mothers who gave everything only to be forgotten. Within a month, the blog had thousands of readers, women my age from across the country. Some shared their stories, others sent photos, small letters of encouragement. Every morning I'd brew coffee, open my laptop, and read the messages. You're giving us hope, Diane. You're the voice we needed. It was strange I had spent so long being silent that I'd forgotten how powerful words could be. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. One afternoon, as I was responding to a comment, an email arrived. The subject line read, "From someone who owes you an apology." My heart skipped. I opened it expecting maybe an old friend, maybe even Jason. But it wasn't him. It was Emily. Diane. I read your blog. I didn't mean for things to go this way. There's something you should know about Jason and about my father. Please don't tell anyone yet. Can we meet Emily? I stared at the screen, disbelief twisting into anger. She'd humiliated me, erased me, and now she wanted to meet. But another part of me hesitated. The letter from Mark, his warning, protect Jason from himself. Was Emily finally ready to tell me what that meant? I replied short and cold. Where and when? The response came almost immediately. Tonight. 11:47 p.m. Same time, same number. I froze. 11:47. That was the exact time she'd called me the night of the wedding, the night everything started to unravel. The cursor blinked on the screen like a heartbeat. I didn't know what Emily wanted, forgiveness, help, or something darker. But one thing was certain: whatever Mark had tried to warn me about 15 years ago was no longer buried in the past. And at 11:47 p.m., I was going to find out what it was. The night Emily wanted to meet the world felt off balance, too quiet, too still. The kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I spent the whole evening pacing around the house, checking the clock every few minutes. The rain had started again, tapping against the window like nervous fingers. I'd made a pot of coffee I never drank, left the lamp on in the living room, even though the light hurt my eyes. I kept reading and rereading Emily's email. There's something you should know about Jason and about my father. What could she possibly tell me now? After everything she'd done, after shutting me out, humiliating me, stealing my son, and yet when the clock on the wall ticked to 11:46, I was already sitting on the couch, phone in hand, staring at the glowing screen. Right on time, the call came. 11:47 p.m. Her voice was shaking. "Diane, are you alone?" "Yes," I said slowly. "Why don't hang up, please? I didn't know who else to call." For a second, I almost hung up anyway. My instincts screamed to end it, to let her drown in whatever mess she'd created. But something in her tone stopped me. It wasn't arrogance. It was terror. "What's going on, Emily?" "Jason's in trouble," she said, voice cracking. "Big trouble." The room seemed to tilt around me. "What kind of trouble? He's been gambling. For months. Online in private clubs I didn't know at first. He's borrowed money from dangerous people." I gripped the phone tighter. Dangerous, how Emily let out a shaky breath. The kind that send people to collect debts. "They came to our house tonight. I thought they were delivery guys until one of them..." Her voice broke. "They told him he had 48 hours to pay $300,000 or they'd come back. And next time they wouldn't knock." My mind went blank. Where is he now? At the apartment. He's trying to sell the car, his watch, anything. But it's not enough. "Have you called the police?" "No," she said quickly. "You don't understand. If they find out we went to the cops..." Her words tumbled over each other. I could hear crying in the background, muffled voices. Then a sound, a sharp knock on her end of the line. "They're outside again," she whispered. "Oh God, Diane, what do I do? I didn't think." I grabbed my coat keys and Mark's old flashlight. "Text me your address," I said. "I'm coming." "No, you can't." But I was already out the door. The rain hit my face like cold needles as I ran to the car. The streets were empty, slick with water reflecting the yellow streetlights. My hands were trembling as I started the engine. For 15 minutes, the only sound was the rhythmic thud of the wipers and Emily's voice echoing in my mind. Jason's in trouble. When I reached their apartment complex, a sleek new building downtown the parking lot was nearly empty. The lights in their unit were off except for one in the kitchen. I could see movement inside, shadows crossing the blinds. I parked by the curb, heart pounding so loud it felt like thunder. The elevator was out of order, so I climbed 4 flights of stairs, my knees aching with every step. When I reached the door, I heard arguing, muffled but sharp. Jason's voice low and panicked. Emily's pleading. Then a third voice. Male. Cold. "You've got until tomorrow night. After that, we take what's ours one way or another." I froze. Footsteps. The door opened suddenly and a tall man in a black coat stepped out, nearly bumping into me. His eyes swept over me, calm, assessing. "Evening, ma'am," he said, polite, in a way that made my blood run cold. Then he walked past me and down the hall, the sound of his boots fading into the rain. Inside, Jason was sitting at the table, his head in his hands. Emily was pacing, mascara streaked down her cheeks. He looked up when he heard me. "Mom." His voice was small, like a boy again. "What are you doing here?" I could ask you the same thing I said, stepping inside. "What have you gotten yourself into?" He shook his head, eyes red. "It was supposed to be quick money. Emily's dad cut me off after the wedding, said I needed to stand on my own 2 feet. I just wanted to prove I could handle things. By gambling," I snapped. "By risking your life." "You don't understand," he said, standing now, voice breaking. "I was good at it at first, then it turned." Emily whispered, "They said if we don't pay by tomorrow night, they'll hurt him. Or me." I sank into the nearest chair, my mind racing. Then Mark's words flashed in my memory like a lightning strike. Protect Jason from himself. He'd known. Somehow he'd known this day would come. "Jason," I said quietly, "listen to me, I can help." He looked at me eyes wide. "How you don't have that kind of money?" I swallowed hard. "You'd be surprised what your father left behind." Their heads snapped toward me. "What do you mean?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer right away. I reached into my purse, pulled out Mark's letter, the one that started all this, and placed it on the table. "Your father was smarter than any of us gave him credit for," I said. "And right now he's about to save you from a mistake that could cost your life." Jason's hands shook as he unfolded the paper, reading the words silently. When he looked up, tears filled his eyes. He knew he whispered. He knew I'd do something this stupid. I reached out and touched his cheek. He didn't know what you'd do. He just knew the world. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, followed by the first flashes of lightning. I took a deep breath. "Pack a bag. Both of you. We're going to see someone, Mark's lawyer. Tonight." Emily stared at me, terrified and hopeful all at once. "You really think he can help?" No, I said, grabbing my keys. "I can." As we stepped into the hallway, Jason turned to lock the door. His hand was still trembling. Then, faintly, from the far end of the corridor, I heard it, the same heavy boots from before. They weren't gone. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about money. Someone wanted something much bigger from my son, something Mark had died to protect. The rain turned to sheets as we ran to the car. Lightning cracked across the sky, splitting the darkness for a second at a time, each flash showing me Jason's pale face in the rearview mirror and Emily's trembling hands clutching her purse like a lifeline. The wipers struggled to keep up. I could barely see the road, just the shimmer of yellow lines through the downpour. No one spoke for the first few minutes. The silence felt alive, buzzing with guilt, fear, and everything we'd all left unsaid for years. Finally, Jason broke it. "Mom, where are we going to see your father's lawyer?" I said, gripping the steering wheel. "He'll help us access the account Mark left. We'll pay off the debt and end this before it gets worse." "Dad left an account," he asked, disbelief cutting through his voice. "Yes," I said. "He planned for things he never told me about. And now I know why." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the highway sign, "Fairview Exit, 2 miles." Emily turned in her seat. "Do you really think it'll be enough? These people don't just want money. They want leverage. Then we'll take their leverage away," I said flatly. For a moment, no one spoke again. The rain softened, but thunder still rolled in the distance like an old engine. Jason sighed. "Mom, I didn't mean for any of this. After the wedding, Emily's dad said he could get me a position in his company, but then he changed his mind, said I wasn't leadership material. I just wanted to prove him wrong. I started small, a few bets with friends. Then I met this guy named Victor, who said he could double anything I put in. I believed him. I bit my lip to keep from yelling. He didn't need a lecture right now. He needed a way out. "How much did you lose before you stopped keeping track?" I asked quietly. Jason hesitated. "About 200 at first. Then I borrowed. I thought I'd win it back before anyone noticed. But when Victor introduced me to his boss, things changed." "What boss?" He stared out the window, rain streaking down the glass. "A man named R.D. He only met me once, but I'll never forget him. He said, 'When your luck runs out, remember everything has a price, even blood.' R.D. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Did he say what the initials stood for?" Jason shook his head. "No, just R.D. But I already knew." My heart dropped to my stomach. Robert Donovan. It couldn't be coincidence. Mark had written his name over and over again in that notebook. He'd refused to join his investment group. And now Robert's name, his initials were tied to the people threatening my son. It all connected. The road curved sharply and I slowed down. Ahead through the sheets of rain, I saw headlights, a black SUV tailing us at a steady distance. Emily turned around and gasped. "Diane, that car's been behind us since we left the apartment." I checked the mirror. She was right. No matter how fast or slow I went, the SUV kept pace. "Jason," I said, voice low. "Check the glove compartment." He opened it, confused. "What am I looking for?" "Mark's flashlight," I said. "And the old phone charger, we might need both." He handed them to me, his hands shaking. "Mom, who are they?" "I don't know yet." I lied. but we're not going to find out on the side of the road. The SUV's headlights flashed once high beams, then again, then a third time. A signal. I accelerated, tires hissing against the wet asphalt. The SUV matched me, closing the distance. "Diane, they're following us," Emily cried. "I see them," I said. My voice came out calmer than I felt. "Seatbelts, now." The storm grew louder, wind pushing against the car like a living thing. I turned onto a smaller road, a back route I knew from driving to St. Mary's for night shifts. The trees on either side leaned in branches, whipping in the rain. The SUV followed. "Hold on," I muttered. I killed the headlights for a second, swerving onto an old service road hidden by a row of bushes. The tires bumped over gravel and mud. We sat there in the dark, breathing hard. Jason peeked through the back window. They passed us. I think we lost them. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was rain hammering on the roof. I turned to face them both. "Listen carefully. We can't go to the police yet. If Robert's behind this, he'll have friends in high places. We go to Alan first. He'll know how to move the money safely." Jason nodded, still pale. Emily, however, looked like she'd seen a ghost. "You think my father's part of this?" I hesitated. "I think your father's been pulling strings longer than you realize." "No," she whispered. He wouldn't threaten your husband's life," I said quietly. "Emily, he's not after Jason. He's after what Mark left behind." She stared at me, eyes wide. "But that was 15 years ago." "Yes, and men like Robert Donovan don't forget debts or revenge." I restarted the engine headlights off, creeping back toward the main road. The SUV was gone, but my nerves weren't. Every shadow looked like a trap. Every sound made me flinch. By the time we reached the outskirts of town, dawn was just starting to break. The rain had thinned to a mist, and the clouds were beginning to glow faintly pink. Jason leaned his head back, exhausted. "Mom," he said softly, "I don't deserve you." I glanced at him in the mirror. "Maybe not," I said, voice cracking a little. "But you're still my son." Emily turned toward me. "Diane, I think I know what my father's after. Something Jason doesn't even realize he has. What I asked. The documents from his job. He brought some home a few weeks ago, blueprints, contracts, I don't know. He said it was just work, but my father kept asking about it. I felt my stomach twist. What kind of work, Jason?" He hesitated. "It's a tech company, renewable energy prototypes. But it's not classified or anything." Emily's eyes met mine. "Unless your father's old company was connected to it somehow." My mind reeled. Mark had worked on military energy systems before he retired. Robert Donovan had tried to invest. Now Jason was working in a similar field, unknowingly holding the very thing Robert once wanted. The storm outside began to fade, but a new one was forming in my chest. We were driving straight toward the truth, and the people willing to kill for it. And behind us, far down the wet highway, a pair of headlights reappeared in the distance. This time, they didn't flash. They followed. The first light of dawn crept through the clouds, turning the rain into a faint silver mist. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, knuckles white as we sped down the narrow back road toward Price and Rowe Attorneys. Jason sat silent in the passenger seat, staring out the window. Emily, in the back, clutched her phone, glancing behind us every few seconds. The black SUV had disappeared again, but I didn't believe for a second it was gone. When we pulled into the small parking lot behind the law office, I felt a rush of relief. Alan's car was there, an old blue sedan parked crookedly under the streetlight. I'd called him 30 minutes earlier, and he'd said to come right away. The rain had almost stopped. The air smelled like wet asphalt and rust. Alan opened the door before we even knocked. His face looked older than it had 2 nights ago, eyes lined with worry. "Diane," he said, ushering us inside, "you shouldn't have driven in this weather." "We didn't have a choice," I replied. They came to Jason's apartment. "He's being threatened." Alan frowned. "Who people working for someone named R.D., I said. "I think it's Robert Donovan." Alan's jaw tightened. I was afraid of that. He led us into his office, a small room stacked with boxes and papers. The fluorescent lights flickered softly overhead. Jason sat down, his head in his hands. Emily hovered near the window, her reflection pale in the glass. "Mr. Price, I said you told me there was money in that account Mark left. How fast can we access it?" Alan nodded slowly. Within a few hours, if we move carefully. But if Robert's involved, it's not just about money. He's after leverage. He unlocked a file drawer, pulled out a folder, and spread out papers across the desk. Your husband knew this might happen, Alan continued. That's why he split the assets, some under your name, some hidden in a trust. The trust is in Jason's name. Jason looked up. Mine. Yes, Alan said. But it's not just money. There are patents, energy storage designs your father developed while working for the Air Force. The Donovans tried to buy them years ago, but he refused. Emily's voice trembled. So my father, he's still after them. Alan nodded grimly. Those designs are worth tens of millions now. I leaned forward. Can we move the funds before he gets to them? Alan hesitated. Maybe. But once we access the trust, it'll leave a digital trail. If Robert's monitoring financial movements, he'll know within hours. Before I could respond, a low hum cut through the air. A car engine outside. Alan went to the window, pushed the blinds aside. The color drained from his face. They're here. My stomach dropped. Through the window, headlights flared the black SUV pulling into the lot. Two men stepped out, both wearing dark coats, their movements calm, deliberate. Alan locked the office door. There's a back exit, he said quickly. Go through the archives room, out to the alley. I'll buy you time. No, I said. You're coming with us. He shook his head. They want the documents. If I can stall them... Jason grabbed his arm. I'm not leaving you here. You don't have time to argue, Alan snapped. He opened a desk drawer, pulled out a flash drive, and pressed it into my hand. Everything your husband protected is on here. Bank access, patent files, proof of ownership. Keep it safe. A loud bang echoed from the hallway. Someone kicked the front door open. Alan pushed us toward the back. Go now. We ran through the narrow corridor, papers scattering under our feet. Emily sobbed softly, clutching Jason's arm. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. Behind us came the crash of footsteps, voices shouting. We reached the archive room. I fumbled with the exit latch, old and stiff from rust. The door wouldn't budge. Jason shoved me aside and threw his shoulder into it. It burst open, slamming against the wall just as a gunshot cracked through the building. I turned back in time to see Alan stumble, clutching his side, his face twisting in pain. Go! He shouted, blood staining his shirt. Go, Diane! Jason tried to run back, but I grabbed his arm. No, don't you dare! He told us to go! We stumbled into the alley as rain started again, light but cold. The sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance, but not close enough. The SUV's headlights swung toward us from the street. Run, I screamed. We sprinted down the alley, water splashing around our feet. I clutched the flash drive so tightly it dug into my palm. Jason turned sharply into a side street, pulling Emily behind him. We ducked behind a dumpster just as the SUV slowed near the alley entrance. Two men stepped out again, scanning the dark. They went that way, one said, pointing toward the main road. I held my breath until they drove off, the sound of the engine fading. We waited a minute longer before Jason whispered, "We have to get to the police, Mom." I shook my head. Not yet. Not until we know who's controlling them. Emily wiped her face. Diane Allen, what if he's... Don't, I said quietly. Not yet. We followed the narrow street until it opened into a diner parking lot. The neon sign flickered 24 hours. I pushed open the door and the smell of coffee and bacon hit us like a memory from another life. The waitress looked up startled at our soaked clothes. Rough night, she asked. You have no idea, I said, sliding into a booth. Jason buried his face in his hands. Emily sat beside him, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and set it on the table. Whatever this is, I whispered, Mark died protecting it. Alan was shot protecting it. And now we're the last ones who can finish it. Jason looked up, his voice hollow. Mom, what if it's not about money? What if Dad was hiding something bigger, something dangerous? Outside, thunder rumbled again, soft and distant. I picked up the flash drive and closed my fist around it. Then we find out. And if the Donovans are behind this... I looked out the diner window toward the empty road. They're going to wish they'd never invited me to that wedding. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. A text. Stop running. You can't protect him forever. My blood went cold. I looked up to see Jason's reflection in the diner window, pale, haunted, and realized something I hadn't before. They weren't after me. They were after him. The rain had stopped by sunrise, leaving the air heavy with that clean, metallic smell that comes after a storm. Inside the diner, everything felt oddly still. The hum of the ceiling fan, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the faint hiss of coffee brewing behind the counter. It could have been any quiet morning in Ohio, except for the flash drive burning a hole in my pocket and the blood that wouldn't wash off my son's hands. Jason hadn't spoken since we left Alan's office. He just stared at the window, eyes hollow, jaw tight. Emily sat close beside him, her hand resting on his arm, trembling slightly. The waitress poured us more coffee. "You folks look like you've seen a ghost," she said kindly. "Something like that," I replied. When she left, Jason whispered, "He's dead, isn't he? Alan." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. Emily looked up, her voice small. They knew where to find us. How I took a deep breath. Because this isn't random. Robert Donovan has eyes everywhere, and I think Mark's secrets are the reason why. I pulled the flash drive from my coat and set it on the table. Its silver surface reflected the diner lights like a mirror. "Your father left this to protect us," I said to Jason. "But now it's the only thing keeping us alive." Jason stared at it. "You think it has the patents on it?" Maybe I said. "Or proof that Robert tried to steal them. Either way, it's worth a fortune." Emily's face went pale. "Then we can't go to the police. My father will hear about it before they even file a report." "Exactly," I said. "We need somewhere safe to look at what's inside, somewhere off-grid." Jason frowned. "You mean the cabin?" I turned to him, surprised. "You still remember that place?" He nodded slowly. "The one Dad used to take me fishing at, up near Lake Erie." I hesitated. "It's isolated, no internet, no cell service." "Perfect," Emily said quietly. "Let's go." We paid the bill, left a generous tip, and slipped out before anyone could remember our faces. The drive north took 4 hours. The further we got from the city, the quieter the world became. The trees turned taller, the roads narrower. The sky was a dull gray stretching endlessly over the flat farmland. By the time we reached the cabin, the air smelled like pine and cold water. The small wooden house sat half hidden behind a row of birch trees exactly as I remembered it. Inside, dust coated everything, and cobwebs clung to the window corners. But the fireplace still had wood stacked neatly beside it, and the old lantern Mark had kept from his military days still hung by the door. Jason started a fire while Emily unpacked a few supplies. I cleared the small kitchen table and set down my laptop. The flash drive slid into the port with a small click. For a second, nothing happened. Then a folder appeared, Project RD Restricted. My pulse quickened. "That's it," I whispered. Mark named the file after Robert Donovan. I clicked it open. Inside were documents, diagrams, and encrypted files. One folder stood out, Weston Energy Contract 2008. Jason leaned over my shoulder. "That's the year Dad got sick." "Exactly," I said. He must have pulled out of the project right before he was diagnosed. I opened a PDF. The title read, Prototype Development Agreement, U.S. Defense Research Division. My stomach dropped. "Oh my God," I murmured. "It's not just renewable energy. It's military-grade power technology, hybrid battery storage for weapons and surveillance drones." Jason blinked. "Dad worked on this, yes," I said. "And Robert tried to buy into it through a private company, Weston Holdings. When Mark refused, they must have gone after him another way." Emily covered her mouth. "My father's been trying to get those designs for years. That's why he pushed Jason into gambling, to get him trapped, desperate, easy to control." Jason's face twisted with realization. "He set me up." He slammed his fist on the table. The laptop shook and the screen flickered. All this time, I thought he just didn't like me. He was playing me like a pawn. I put my hand on his arm. "That's why your father hid it." He knew Robert would use anyone, even his own daughter's husband, to get what he wanted. The room went quiet except for the crackle of the fire. I clicked open another document, a scanned letter from Mark to Alan dated 2 weeks before his death. "If anything happens to me, give Diane access. Robert Donovan won't stop until he controls the patents. Tell her the real asset isn't the money, it's the ownership rights. If Jason ever gets pulled in, use the account to protect him." Tears blurred my vision. My husband had seen it all coming years before it happened. Jason read the words silently, his lips moving. When he finished, he sat back, stunned. "He died trying to save us," he whispered. "Yes," I said softly, "and now it's our turn to finish what he started." Emily looked from me to Jason. "We can't just sit here. My father will find us." "I know," I said, "but we can use this." I pointed to the files. "We have proof that Robert's been laundering money through shell companies to chase government contracts. If we leak this to the right people, he's finished." Jason frowned. "That's dangerous, Mom." So is staying quiet. Before he could argue, the faint crunch of tires on gravel echoed outside. We all froze. Jason moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside just a sliver. His voice dropped to a whisper. "There's a car. Black. No headlights." Emily's face went white. "He found us." I unplugged the flash drive, slipped it into my pocket, and motioned for them to move. Through the back, I whispered. The door creaked as we stepped into the freezing air. The forest smelled like damp leaves and smoke. We crouched behind the woodpile just as the car door opened. Footsteps, heavy, 2 of them. One voice, calm and familiar. "She's here. I told you she wouldn't run far." Jason's eyes met mine. "Mom, that's..." I nodded. "Robert." He'd come himself. The rain had stopped by sunrise, leaving the air heavy with that clean metallic smell that comes after a storm. Inside the diner, everything felt oddly still. The hum of the ceiling fan, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the faint hiss of coffee brewing behind the counter. It could have been any quiet morning in Ohio, except for the flash drive burning a hole in my pocket and the blood that wouldn't wash off my son's hands. Jason hadn't spoken since we left Alan's office. He just stared at the window, eyes hollow, jaw tight. Emily sat close beside him, her hand resting on his arm, trembling slightly. The waitress poured us more coffee. "You folks look like you've seen a ghost," she said kindly. "Something like that," I replied. When she left, Jason whispered, "He's dead, isn't he, Alan?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. Emily looked up, her voice small. They knew where to find us. How I took a deep breath. Because this isn't random. Robert Donovan has eyes everywhere, and I think Mark's secrets are the reason why. I pulled the flash drive from my coat and set it on the table. Its silver surface reflected the diner lights like a mirror. "Your father left this to protect us," I said to Jason. "But now it's the only thing keeping us alive." Jason stared at it. "You think it has the patents on it?" "Maybe," I said. "Or proof that Robert tried to steal them. Either way, it's worth a fortune." Emily's face went pale. "Then we can't go to the police. My father will hear about it before they even file a report." "Exactly," I said. "We need somewhere safe to look at what's inside, somewhere off-grid." Jason frowned. "You mean the cabin?" I turned to him, surprised. "You still remember that place?" He nodded slowly. "The one Dad used to take me fishing at, up near Lake Erie." I hesitated. "It's isolated, no internet, no cell service." "Perfect," Emily said quietly. "Let's go." We paid the bill, left a generous tip, and slipped out before anyone could remember our faces. The drive north took 4 hours. The further we got from the city, the quieter the world became. The trees turned taller, the roads narrower. The sky was a dull gray stretching endlessly over the flat farmland. By the time we reached the cabin, the air smelled like pine and cold water. The small wooden house sat half hidden behind a row of birch trees exactly as I remembered it. Inside, dust coated everything, and cobwebs clung to the window corners. But the fireplace still had wood stacked neatly beside it, and the old lantern Mark had kept from his military days still hung by the door. Jason started a fire while Emily unpacked a few supplies. I cleared the small kitchen table and set down my laptop. The flash drive slid into the port with a small click. For a second, nothing happened. Then a folder appeared, Project RD Restricted. My pulse quickened. "That's it," I whispered. Mark named the file after Robert Donovan. I clicked it open. Inside were documents, diagrams, and encrypted files. One folder stood out, Weston Energy Contract 2008. Jason leaned over my shoulder. That's the year Dad got sick. Exactly, I said. He must have pulled out of the project right before he was diagnosed. I opened a PDF. The title read, Prototype Development Agreement, U.S. Defense Research Division. My stomach dropped. Oh my God, I murmured. It's not just renewable energy. It's military-grade power technology, hybrid battery storage for weapons and surveillance drones. Jason blinked. Dad worked on this, yes, I said. And Robert tried to buy into it through a private company, Weston Holdings. When Mark refused, they must have gone after him another way. Emily covered her mouth. My father's been trying to get those designs for years. That's why he pushed Jason into gambling to get him trapped, desperate, easy to control. Jason's face twisted with realization. He set me up. He slammed his fist on the table. The laptop shook and the screen flickered. All this time, I thought he just didn't like me. He was playing me like a pawn. I put my hand on his arm. That's why your father hid it. He knew Robert would use anyone, even his own daughter's husband, to get what he wanted. The room went quiet except for the crackle of the fire. I clicked open another document, a scanned letter from Mark to Alan dated 2 weeks before his death. If anything happens to me, give Diane access. Robert Donovan won't stop until he controls the patents. Tell her the real asset isn't the money, it's the ownership rights. If Jason ever gets pulled in, use the account to protect him. Tears blurred my vision. My husband had seen it all coming years before it happened. Jason read the words silently, his lips moving. When he finished, he sat back, stunned. He died trying to save us, he whispered. Yes, I said softly. And now it's our turn to finish what he started. Emily looked from me to Jason. We can't just sit here. My father will find us. I know, I said, but we can use this. I pointed to the files. We have proof that Robert's been laundering money through shell companies to chase government contracts. If we leak this to the right people, he's finished. Jason frowned. That's dangerous, Mom. So is staying quiet. Before he could argue, the faint crunch of tires on gravel echoed outside. We all froze. Jason moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside just a sliver. His voice dropped to a whisper. There's a car. Black. No headlights. Emily's face went white. He found us. I unplugged the flash drive, slipped it into my pocket, and motioned for them to move. Through the back, I whispered. The door creaked as we stepped into the freezing air. The forest smelled like damp leaves and smoke. We crouched behind the woodpile just as the car door opened. Footsteps. Heavy. 2 of them. One voice calm and familiar. She's here. I told you she wouldn't run far. Jason's eyes met mine. Mom. That's... I nodded. Robert. He'd come himself. I hadn't heard Robert Donovan's voice in years, but the moment it cut through the still air, the past came roaring back. The dinner table, smiles, the cold laughter, the way he looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. He was standing a few yards away, half hidden by the trees. His umbrella gleamed under the weak light from the cabin porch, and beside him were 2 men, the same ones from the SUV. I motioned for Jason and Emily to stay down. My heart was beating so loud I was sure he could hear it. Diane Robert called out smoothly, his tone like poison wrapped in velvet, "You can stop hiding. You always did have a flair for the dramatic." Jason flinched, but I placed a hand on his arm. "He wants a reaction," I whispered. "Don't give him one." The crunch of his shoes on wet gravel grew louder. "You know," Robert continued, "your husband was a smart man, stubborn but smart. He could have made us all rich. Instead, he chose to be a martyr." He stopped near the porch, his eyes scanning the shadows. "And now you've dragged my daughter and your son into his mess. But you can still fix this, Diane. Hand over the drive." The words hit like a slap. He already knew about it. I stood up slowly from behind the woodpile. Jason tried to pull me back, but I shook him off. "Stay here," I whispered. I stepped into the open. The wet earth squished under my shoes. "You always did like sending men to do your dirty work," I said. "What's wrong, Robert? Running out of people to threaten?" He smiled thinly. The years had been kind to him, too kind. His suit was spotless. His silver hair slicked back, his shoes polished despite the mud, the picture of control. "You think you're standing on moral high ground," he said calmly, "but all I see is a woman clutching stolen property. Mark's patents belong to Weston Holdings. Legally." I let out a short laugh. "Legally, you forged contracts, intimidated witnesses, and bribed half the board. You call that legal?" His smile faltered for a split second, then returned, still fiery. I almost missed that. The men beside him shifted hands inside their coats. My pulse quickened. I could almost feel the flash drive in my pocket like a live wire. "Give me the drive," Diane Roberts said softly, "and you can walk away. No one else has to die." That was the first time he said it outright, die. I took a step closer. "Alan Price is dead because of you. My husband, too. You won't touch my son." His eyes narrowed. "Your husband killed himself with paranoia, and Alan collateral damage. You think you can stop a corporation, a machine." Behind him, Emily's voice rang out, shaking but loud. "Dad, stop!" Robert turned sharply, his face tightening as she stepped from the shadows beside the cabin. Jason followed right behind her, his fists clenched. "Emily." Robert said, voice dropping, "What are you doing?" "You used us," she said, tears streaking her face. "You ruined everything. Jason nearly died because of your schemes. I did what I had to do," he snapped. "Everything I built, everything you wear exists because I take risks you can't understand." Jason moved forward, fury etched into his face. "You're a monster. You turned my father's work into blackmail." Robert raised his hand slightly, and one of the men stepped forward, pulling out a gun. "Jason," he said quietly, "you're young. You don't know how the world works. Your father thought honor mattered more than power. That's why he died poor." I felt something inside me snap. "He died honest," I said. "You wouldn't know what that feels like if it burned your soul." Robert sighed, tired, as though this was all just an inconvenience. "I'm losing patience. Last chance. The drive, Diane. Slide it across the ground, and you all walk away." For a long moment, the rain filled the silence again, soft, relentless. I glanced at Jason. His eyes met mine. I saw Mark in him, the stubbornness, the quiet fire. Then slowly, I reached into my coat pocket. Robert's men tensed, guns raised. But instead of the flash drive, I pulled out Mark's old flashlight, heavy metal military grade. I flicked it on and shone the beam straight into Robert's eyes. "Run!" I shouted. Jason grabbed Emily's hand and bolted toward the trees. I swung the flashlight like a club, hitting one of the men's arms just as the gun went off. The shot tore through the night, echoing across the forest. Robert cursed. "Get them!" I ducked behind the porch as another bullet splintered the railing. My ears rang. Jason yelled Mom from somewhere in the woods. "Keep going," I shouted back. The gunfire stopped as quickly as it started. Then came Robert's voice again, steady, calculated. "You think you can outrun me? The police won't help you. I own them. The courts, too. You have nowhere to go, Diane." I forced myself to stand breathing hard. Maybe not. But I still have something you'll never get. "And what's that?" "Your daughter's respect." That hit him like a punch. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Emily stepped from the edge of the trees, her face pale but steady. "You're right, Mom," she said. "He's not getting it." In her hand was Mark's lighter, small, engraved something Jason must have grabbed from the cabin earlier. She flicked it once. The flame burned bright in the rain. Robert's eyes widened as she tossed it straight onto the porch where one of his men had dropped a leaking gas can. The explosion was deafening. Flames burst upward, swallowing the porch in a flash of orange and smoke. Robert stumbled back, shouting. His men dove for cover. Jason pulled me toward the woods, yelling, "Go now!" We ran, the sound of fire roaring behind us, heat licking at our backs. Branches tore at my face as we stumbled through the trees, the world flickering orange and black. When we finally reached the main road, breathless and soaked, I looked back. The cabin was a pillar of fire against the pale morning sky. Jason turned to me, eyes wide. "Mom." The flash drive, I opened my fist. The metal casing was warm but intact, still here. Emily stood beside us, trembling, staring at the fire. "He won't stop," she whispered. "Not after this. I looked at her, truly looked, and saw that she finally understood the family she'd married into, and the one she'd tried to destroy. "No," I said quietly. "He won't stop. But neither will we." Behind us, sirens wailed in the distance. Ahead, the road stretched toward the sunrise. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the cabin was gone, just blackened beams and a rising column of gray smoke. The air smelled of burned wood and gasoline, and somewhere beneath it all, the faint metallic tang of endings. We stood across the road, wrapped in an old emergency blanket one of the neighbors had brought, watching everything Mark had built turn to ash. Jason's arm was around my shoulder, Emily, leaning against him, silent. The flashing red lights painted their faces in slow pulses, blood, then nothing, then blood again. An officer came over, notebook in hand. "You folks, the ones who called this in," I nodded. "Yes, we were driving by. Saw the fire." He studied his pen, tapping against the pad. "Anyone else up there? Neighbors said they heard gunshots." I hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "Hunters, maybe," I said finally. "It's the season." He frowned but didn't press. "You'll need to stay in town for questioning." "Of course," I said, giving him my best nurse's smile, the calm, trustworthy kind that hides 1,000 lies. When he walked away, Jason exhaled shakily. "Mom, what if they find something?" "Dad's papers, the flash drive." "They won't," I said. "The fire erased everything that they could use against us." Emily looked at me, eyes rimmed red. "But Robert, he'll tell the police it was arson." "Let him," I said. "He's the one with the motive." We spent the night at a motel off Highway 2. It was one of those places that smelled faintly of bleach and cigarettes, where the wallpaper peeled near the outlets and the vending machine hummed all night. I sat on the edge of the bed laptop, opened the flash drive, plugged in one last time. Most of the files had been corrupted in the fire water, damaged or half erased by the heat. But the key documents survived: the letter from Mark, the patents, the account records linking Robert Donovan's companies to illegal military funding. I sent them all encrypted to 3 places: a national journalist who specialized in corporate crime, a defense watchdog group, and a lawyer Alan had once mentioned in his notes. Then I deleted everything from my computer and tossed the flash drive into the motel's ice bucket. I poured water over it and watched it short out with a faint sizzle. Jason sat on the bed across from me, watching. "It's really over." "Not yet," I said. "But soon." He rubbed his hands over his face. "I still can't believe Dad saw all of this coming. He was dying and he was still protecting us. He always did," I said quietly, "even when we didn't see it." Emily sat near the window, staring out at the rain-soaked parking lot. "He'll come after me next," she whispered. "My father. He'll say I betrayed him." I turned to her. "Then let him. The truth's already moving faster than he can stop it. He can't silence everyone." But she didn't look convinced. The guilt had sunk deep into her eyes, the kind that doesn't wash away with sleep or forgiveness. By morning, news of the fire was on every local channel. The headlines were cautious, but ominous. "Billionaire developer linked to late-night fire at remote property." They didn't name us, not yet, but they would. I made coffee in the motel room while Jason scrolled through his phone. "Mom," he said suddenly, "the account Dad left, the money's still there. I checked it this morning. How much? $482,000. I looked at him. "You could disappear with that." He shook his head. "No, we could start over with it. All of us." Emily turned from the window. Jason took her hand. "If you still want that." Her eyes filled, but she nodded. For a moment, the room felt almost peaceful. 3 people who'd been torn apart, now bound together by something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't hate anymore either. Then my phone rang, a blocked number. I froze. Jason mouthed, "Don't answer," but I did anyway. "Diane." Robert's voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "You think you've won. You haven't. The story won't stick. Money fades, memories fade. But what you did to me, that won't." I closed my eyes. "You did this to yourself. You burned everything trying to own what wasn't yours. You don't understand," he hissed. "This isn't over." Then he hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time, the dial tone humming like a warning. 3 days later, the story broke nationally. The journalist I'd emailed published an exposé with evidence of Robert Donovan's shell company's offshore accounts and decades of fraud. Photos of the burned cabin appeared in every major outlet. Headlines screamed, "Donovan family under investigation. Robert was arrested that afternoon." Emily saw it first on TV, her father in handcuffs, expression cold and unreadable as cameras flashed. She didn't speak. She just pressed her hand against the screen and whispered, I'm sorry. Jason walked over, wrapped his arms around her. He made his choices. We'll make better ones. For the first time in months, I felt something shift in my chest, a fragile lightness like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. A week later, I visited Mark's grave again. The lilies were gone, replaced by wildflowers the wind must have scattered there. I brushed the dirt from his name and whispered, "It's done, love. You were right to be afraid, but we're safe now." I left a folded note on the stone, a single line written in my shaky handwriting. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the last gift I have to give. When I turned to leave, I saw someone standing at the edge of the cemetery path. Emily. She walked toward me slowly, hands in her coat pockets. "Jason told me you come here," she said softly. "I wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on him. On me. Even when you should have." I smiled sadly. "We all make mistakes, but if we stop believing people can change, then what's left?" She nodded, eyes wet. "He's lucky to have you." "So are you," I said, touching her shoulder. "Make sure you don't forget it." We stood there for a long while, watching the morning light stretch across the graves, the world finally still. That night back at the motel, I found a small envelope slipped under the door. No return address. Inside was a single brass key, old worn, with a note attached in thin handwriting. "For the day Jason learns the truth about his father." I stared at it, my heart thudding. The same words Mark had written years ago. But this wasn't his handwriting. It was Alan's. And suddenly, I realized the story wasn't over at all. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the brass key glinting under the weak yellow light. My fingers traced the numbers engraved on it, 07, worn smooth with time. I knew that number. Mark had used it once years ago when we rented a safety deposit box after his diagnosis. But that box had been emptied after he passed. Or so I'd believed. The note from Alan trembled in my hand. "For the day Jason learns the truth about his father." My chest tightened. What more could there possibly be? Jason walked out of the bathroom, toweling his hair, the lines of exhaustion still carved deep in his face. "You're still up," he said. I held out the key. "This came tonight. From Alan." He frowned, taking it carefully. "Alan's dead mom. I know," I whispered. "But his handwriting isn't." Emily came closer, her expression wary. "What truth? Haven't we been through enough secrets?" I looked at both of them, the son I'd almost lost, the daughter-in-law I'd nearly hated. "Maybe it's not about pain this time," I said. "Maybe it's closure." Jason turned the key in his hand, studying it. 0097, he murmured. "That's the old bank in Columbus, right? The one Dad used for the house deed." I nodded slowly. "The one we closed after he died. But maybe it was never really closed." Outside, the wind rattled the motel windows, carrying with it the sound of distant thunder. Another storm was rolling in. Jason looked at me, a spark of determination in his tired eyes. "Then tomorrow morning we find out what Dad wanted us to know." At dawn, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the gray light stretch over the wet asphalt. The key rested on the nightstand beside me, glinting faintly with every flash of lightning. For 15 years, my life had been built on fragments, love loss, betrayal, forgiveness. But this key? It wasn't an ending. It was an opening. Emily stirred awake and looked at me. "You think you're ready for whatever's in there?" I smiled faintly. "No, but I'm going anyway, because that's what mothers do. We keep going even when every truth feels like a wound." I reached for the key, its metal cool against my palm, and whispered into the morning air, "All right, Mark, one last secret." And somewhere outside, thunder answered. The next morning, the sky was a dull silver clouds hanging low like heavy curtains. We drove in silence toward First National Bank of Columbus, the place Mark and I had once visited so many years ago, to secure what little future we thought we had left. When we walked in, the marble floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Jason carried the key in his palm as if it might disappear. The manager, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, took one look at the number and frowned. "Box 0097, she said. "That account's been dormant since 2008. No one's accessed it since the original holder passed." She hesitated, then added, "But his name, it matches yours, ma'am." She led us down a narrow corridor lined with gray safety deposit boxes. The sound of our footsteps echoed softly. Jason slid the key into the lock. It turned with a faint metallic sigh as if exhaling 15 years of secrets. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed but sealed perfectly. My name was written across it in Mark's familiar handwriting. Jason stepped back. "Go ahead, Mom." I opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter, no money, no patents, no legal papers. Just one small photograph marked Jason as a child and a man I didn't recognize. The letter read, "Diane. If you're reading this, then you've already survived what I feared most. The man beside me in this photo is Alan. He's Jason's godfather, and more than that, my insurance. If anything happens to you or our boy, he'll know what to do. Trust him, and tell Jason he's stronger than he thinks." My hands trembled. Jason touched the photo, his voice barely a whisper. He planned everything, even Alan. I smiled through tears. Your father didn't just save us. He made sure love outlived him. And as the morning light filtered through the small window, the years of loss and anger seemed to lift, replaced by something quieter, steadier. Peace.